Berea Planning Commission work/business session. This is our Tuesday, May 14th meeting. We do have a work session as well as a business session to take care of. And before we get started with our work session, what I'd like to do is the commission has changed just a little bit, but there's still some familiar faces around. I'd like to just do a little roll call, start from my left, and we'll go all the way around to the right and just kind of tell everybody who you are, and we'll get things started.
Excuse me, Betty Oldlinger, former chair of Planning and Zoning, and I guess I've been on it 10, 12, how many years? Several, so
Yeah,
a
I
lot.
think this is the third term.
Oh, third, thank
I
you.
think, yeah, maybe fourth.
Maybe fourth. Thank you.
My name's Jeff Johnson. I'm in my second year on the commission.
Denise Rubin, I'm on my second term.
Martin Richards, yeah, at least second term, something like that. Not as long as Betty, but
My name's Greg Lakes. I'm the new chair.
Mike Barnett, I don't know how long I've been here. I just show up there.
Stephanie Hembry, I think this is going to be about a year here shortly, so, yeah.
And my name's John Eipert, and I am brand new, and today is day one.
Yeah.
welcome, John.
Welcome, John. Thanks for serving, being part of the commission. Appreciate that. All right, so we have our work session. Item 1, City of Berea Land Management Development Ordinance, LMDO, and proposed changes, and we will look to Amanda for this part.
Well, I will start by saying I hope you all enjoyed a couple months off. So it's been since February since we had a planning commission meeting. And while it seems like it has just flown by, that was basically 2 months of us not meeting. And so, of course, with that, it is, while you guys were enjoying time off, I was working on these changes, and it's time for us to get back to work. So, but again, I hope you did enjoy a few months of not having meetings. Welcome to John Eipert, and certainly want to just say thank you to Chester Powell for his service to Planning Commission. So he served 2 terms with us. And, you know, we greatly appreciate his service. This land management and development ordinance, this is the binder in front of you, is our city's subdivision regulations is what most communities call them. It is really about land use and how we, having a local planning and zoning, how we regulate new developments, where we allow certain businesses in certain zones, and really kind of gets into the weeds of how we expect for development, not so much construction, but types of businesses, down to street lighting. And so we're gonna go through changes to this document this evening. These changes have come from, the last time we adopted this document or made changes was 2018. And I've proposed some changes along the way, but it is quite a task. And so this is basically 6 years worth of notes. And these notes have come from different avenues. So it could be planning commission, something that maybe we give a variance over and over and over, or a waiver over and over and over. So at some point you just change the regulations, right? Or it could come from council, it could come from hot topics in the planning world. So we've got a couple of those, like accessory dwelling units and you know, the housing crisis. So what can the city do for that? And so we've got some of those that we'll talk about tonight. We have regional issues, changes in state laws. So a lot of things factor into how we get this document and the changes that we make. But first and foremost, it comes from KRS 100 tells us where we've established a planning commission, tells us what we can and cannot regulate. and tells us in a lot of different cases how you have to do things. So certain things like zone changes, that's a state law. We don't get a say in that. So some of these things are kind of set in stone, but we put them in our local regulations, really as information for people and as a guide for ourselves. So some things, again, we can regulate, some things we can't. I will always say it's a living document, so it needs to be. What I do is I keep a copy in my office, and when people suggest changes, you know, I'm kind of working through that each year. You know, every time I see somebody and we suggest a change, you know, I'm kind of marking through that so that we capture those, and really kind of do a big overhaul like this. This evening, I will try to plan on keeping this to about 45 minutes. So, depending on where we are after that 45 minutes, and again, please remind me when that time comes, we'll see where we stand. If I only need 15 more minutes to finish up, we may just suffer through it. If I need another 45 minutes, we'll use our business session on the 28th to do that. The process for approval of this document is, we, as the Planning Commission, once we understand and agree to the changes, we will have a public hearing, and we will notify, we'll put ads in the paper, we'll put it on Facebook, you know, we'll send it to community groups, to developers, and we will inform them that these changes are, that we're having a public hearing and these changes are proposed. For this evening's meeting, I did invite the council, the mayor, city administrator, so that we can, again, have, you know, a larger conversation about these changes. So we appreciate each of you coming, community members. We appreciate those of you who are being part of this process. Because again, we need citizen input, right? It is their document too. In terms of the process, so Planning Commission will host a public hearing. And then it will go to 2 readings of an ordinance by City Council that will formally adopt it, and that is set by KRS statute and how we actually make the changes to this document. And then again, we've repeated that in section 401 in our local regulations. So I would very much like for this to be a discussion, including those in the audience. Feel free to ask questions, feel free to interrupt, because again, I want everybody to understand what we're trying to accomplish. And if you have questions, just let me know. How we're gonna do this is, I've given you a key sheet here. And this key sheet, this is going to be a lot of back and forth in this document. But I'm gonna just work down the key sheet, because it gives it an order of section, but there are gonna be a few times I'm gonna ask you to go back and forth. So Brian is here to show it on the screen, to help you find your place, and I've got a pointer if we need to go there. So whatever we need to do to get everybody on the right page. So unless we have other questions, I'll just get started. All right, so if you will start with section 301.
Amanda, before we get into 301, I spent most of the day rereading all this stuff and the little stuff. I hate to start off with something like this, but in 202, purpose, right? The purpose of this ordinance is to promote public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the city of Berea, Kentucky. I question the use of the word morals, just because it can be a very subjective thing. I'm not proposing that it be amoral, so I'm just throwing it out there, right? It's either get rid of it or substitute community values or something like that.
Yep, I agree. Okay. I should have also mentioned that the changes that you all see, today, the point that we are at, I have met with our, city attorney, J.T. Gilbert. He's reviewed the changes, and I have met with Mayor Fraley and City Administrator Beverly. So they are aware of the changes that we are proposing. Just to give you a heads up that we have at least run it by the attorney and those people who are decision makers. So, so 301. One of the things you'll see in a couple pages is that we would like to get rid of the Architectural Review Board. So this is a board that in the past has not been filled because they haven't been needed very often. And their duty is primarily to control, to make decisions or approvals for the overlay districts, which are Old Town and Chestnut Street. Well, as we all know, there aren't a lot of vacant lots in Old Town and Chestnut Street. And so unless somebody's completely changing the facade of the face of their building, they don't have to go for any approvals. So what we would like to do is instead of, in fact, it's been over 15 years since the city has called an architectural review board meeting, and so because of that, again, we don't keep people on that committee. So we would like to make that a responsibility of the Planning Commission. We think that that serves this role well, to just add that we would take on those duties formally of the Architectural Review Board and basically give us oversight of those overlay districts. In 305, this was a recommendation from our city attorney to remove the entire penalties section of 305 because it is exactly stated as in KRS statute, and as those statutes sometimes update, we don't want to have different information than what's in the statute. So we will just refer to that statute here. 306, again, remove Architectural Review Board, that section in its entirety, and give those duties to the Planning Commission. 4012, which is on page 8. So one thing that has come from, we've actually been practicing this for quite some time, a couple years. One thing that came from the Kentucky Bar Association through some legislation is that an individual property owner can represent themselves at a public hearing. But an individual cannot represent a corporation, a partnership, limited liability, LLCs, any entity other than yourself. So it depends on how the public record shows that you own that piece of property. And so we've included that in several sections, including zone change, conditional use permits, variances, anything that requires a public hearing, to make sure that we are getting the right representation. And essentially that just is, if I'm in a corporation, one person can't be the spokesperson. It needs to be in a third-party entity. Yes?
Say I want to do a zone change, like it's my own, and I want to represent myself, so I can do.
You can if,
They said you gotta have an
only if it's in an LLC, corporation, entity other than an individual property owner. So if you are Jerry Little and Jerry Little owns this lot, he can represent himself in the public hearing. Yep.
Amanda, what if an individual is a sole proprietor of a business, but it is an LLC?
In those cases, we don't have our attorney here, but in those cases, I believe that if they prove that they are sole proprietorship, they could speak for themselves because there's no other members of that company or corporation. Yeah, so I believe that to be the case. I've not run into that where we've had to make that decision, but I believe that to be the case. The other reason to have an attorney is because oftentimes individuals you know, again, the state statute controls zone changes, controls variances and findings that have to be made. And, you know, having legal counsel to do that for you ensures that you are actually producing or making those findings as necessary for the record.
Just to point out in your verbiage there, if the owner of record is a corporation, trust, limited liability company, nonprofit organization, or entity other than an individual property owner or owners.
Oh, that should be owner. Yep. Good catch.
Yay me?
Yeah, you're gonna, yeah. Oh, that could be why we put it, yeah, it could be owners, plural. So your husband and wife, I'll check with JT on that just to make sure if we need to change that.
Well, and the only thing I was going for, which you went somewhere where I wasn't necessarily going, but legal representation was required for public hearings, and I was just saying, you might be leaning more towards legal representation than not, whether you're a sole proprietor, if you're listed as your business or your, depending on how your business listing is.
Yep, so we need to check sole proprietor, and we need to check owners, plural. Yeah, I'm thinking owners, let me check on that, like if it were
Yeah.
three siblings that owned a piece of property, could one speak for them all?
Right.
I think that would be a question. Okay, very good point. Okay. I did change, if you go to page 12, I've copied, the verbiage, so this used to be in our regulations, but it was in a different section, and it's really all about, if you are requesting a zone change, the planning commission, through KRS, will allow us to request a development plan or a conceptual plan. Where this was located was in a different section before, so it was always hard to find, so I've just moved it. Same language, just moved it. Oh, yes.
Something you said, a zone change hasn't got anything to, I mean, it lets you build on it, but why would you have to have a development plan to do a zone change? You gotta do it, I don't understand that.
So you have a valid point in that zoning is all about land use, and if it's a permitted land use, then it should be allowed. The situations that I have seen that were situations where the commission couldn't control, really didn't have control. So the people were coming to ask for a very specific use. And so I'll give you an example. That the first thing that comes to mind, the example I can think of where we as a commission used this statute is, we had someone who was proposing a 55 plus community. Well, they were changing it to R3 zoning, if I remember off the top of my head. Well, R3 allows for apartments to be built, multifamily. That's not what they were asking for. They were asking for duplexes, multiple duplexes on one lot, which is still multifamily, but I think there was a big concern from adjacent property owners. We don't want this to end up being full of apartments. So what it allows the commission to do is basically have an agreement of what's going to be constructed there.
Say I've got me a lot over here,
Uh-huh.
and I want to speculate on this lot, and I want to change it to R3
And that's, right, and that's very often the case, that we don't even talk about what might be on that lot or what might be constructed. But in the case that the applicant has a very, defined use for what they are proposing, it does allow for, and we don't practice this very often. Again, it is that very, just a one-off chance where the applicant is requesting something that doesn't really fit in this box.
I may have misunderstood you. I thought you just said it was a change. Anytime you do a zone change, you have to have a developer.
No, it says so it said, what it actually says is, as a condition of granting a zone change, the commission may require.
That's the same thing.
It's not, but it's not a always, we don't always do it. It is,
It gives them the right, though, to make you do a development plan if they change it. That's not fair.
well, that's KRS statute, so you're probably gonna have to talk to your legislators on that. That comes directly from the KRS statute. Okay, all right. That's my final answer on that, yes. Well, I'm sorry, but that's what KRS says, so. But again,
Developer's hands or a land inspector.
but it also says where agreed upon, right? And so that means the applicant's coming in proposing this very particular use. The planning commission is agreeing to this very particular use. And it may be the situation that if that doesn't get built, we may not, there may be some real concern about what could be put on that lot. And it does prevent people from switching, yeah. But again, not very commonly used, but it is an option from the KRS statute.
But you've got to have codes and regulations, I fully understand that, but restricting people's use of a piece of property they pay for is, it gets a little complicated sometimes.
It does.
But go ahead,
Okay. Okay, all right. But thank you for the comment. Let's see here. 401.3, number 6. Oh, let me start here. At page 14, you'll see something that's not on this because I did a general statement. So it is this section, I'll get my little thing to work, right in the middle of the page. My pointer's hard to see, but this blue right here in the middle of the page, and it talks about for drainage of surface water and erosion control. So throughout this document, and I did not include every section that we've made this change to, the city we redid our stormwater control manual last year. It was adopted in 2023. And what we did is we had 3 documents where we had stormwater regulations. So we had them in this document, then we had them in the stormwater manual, and we had them in the ordinance. So what we did is we pulled all the stormwater information out of here and just basically referenced the current edition of the stormwater manual. So you'll see that several times.
On stormwater,
Mm-hmm.
have we looked at cutting down the size of some of these retention ponds that's a little bit too big?
We did,
Every condition don't apply.
yeah, we did.
I know it's too big, okay?
Well, we did. So we changed it. We looked at a lot of other cities' regulations when we adopted that manual. And we went to, basically there's a federal requirement, a state requirement that says you have to meet these. So we didn't have a choice, we had to meet those. But they were less stringent than what the city had previously. And so we did change it to the least restrictive that we could by law. Let me put it that way. I don't know what that is. Oh, the existing? Changing, like, are you saying reshaping it, filling it in? Yeah, you you would have to submit, someone would need to submit stormwater calculations, and we would have to go through the approval process for that. If someone wanted to fill one in, reduce the size, make it smaller. Just again, to make sure that it meets those, minimum requirements. 401.3. We would like to put a time limit on how long development plans sit without having a resubmittal. And we would like that timeline to be 6 months. So what happens is, through the development process, developer engineer submits a development plan. And it goes through the development review team, so it gets looked at by utilities, by stormwater, by codes and planning, GIS, just everybody and their grandma, you know, group. And we send a list of corrections or changes to the engineer developer. And sometimes those sit in our office for a long time. And either people's projects have got put on hold, whatever reason. But then what happens is, if they come in a year later or 6 months later, well, that project is long gone off of our minds, certainly long gone off the city engineer's minds. And it's just not easy to pick right up after that project's been on hold for 6 months. So we would like for that to, and I will say, the other part of that is, if you have changes in your regulations, you know, what is the timeline? So could we let them sit 2 years and then pick back up for an approval and not make them go back to utilities for review or whomever for review? So we would like to put a 6-month timeline on that, so that we make sure that we are getting these things through the process, right? Yes.
On that, the 6 months, and that 6 months be after it's final approved, 6 months after that.
No, so they don't expire at all. We're not talking about how long they have to build it or start building it. We are talking about the approval process in itself. So developers submitted a set of plans. It's gone through the development review team. We're waiting on corrections from that engineer or developer. So it's basically on their shoulders at that point.
Now, you misunderstood what I said. Everything's been approved, this thing.
No, it has not. Hasn't been to planning commission for approval.
It's been approved, it's ready to go, and I lose my finances or something, and I've got to resubmit that thing
No, once it's approved, they need to get their signatures and get it back to us, because once it's approved, it never expires. So if you lose your financing, you can build it 10 years down the road.
if it's all approved.
If it's all approved. We're trying to get a finish line for approval. That's really what we're trying to get, is a finish line for approval.
But you see what I was asking, if I've got it fully approved, everything's good, I'd hate to have to come back 6 months later and get it approved again.
Oh, yeah, we don't want people to do that. We don't, no, that's not what we're trying for. If you've got it fully approved, all you need to go do is get your signatures. Well, go get your signatures, even if you lost your financing, right? Go get your signatures, turn it back into us, so that we have a signed off, approved copy. Yeah, fully approved, yeah. So we're really trying to just get to a finish line of that approval. And what I've seen over time is, you know, people change, city engineers change, regulations change. And so it's hard to pick back up if that's been sitting there and nothing's being done on a project for over 6 months.
6 months of time, and you give it back to them.
Yes.
So how many, just a ballpark idea, in a year, how many projects would this affect?
Not many. It's the one-off.
1 or 2?
It's the one-off situation, but it never fails. That one-off situation is, you know, the people that scream the loudest.
Okay.
This one I don't particularly know. And, so most jurisdictions put a timeline on the approved development plan. This is totally different, right? So most jurisdictions say you must start construction within a year. We don't want to do that, again, because you've gone through that process. We understand financing changes, we understand partnerships changes, you know, there's so many factors, cost changes, that we don't want to limit when people start. Again, we really want to encourage them to get their plans approved, get through this process. And then when you want to build, now you've got a full set of plans to build by, and we can say, yes, they've been approved. Might have been 10 years ago, but it's been approved. So now you can still build that. All right, let's see. Conditional use, so this one is that adding that language for legal representation again, that we're gonna check, that's 403.1. Variance, same thing in 404.1. 406.5, so these next couple ones are really the most commonly used things in this book. And that is lot sizes and what we allow in what zone. So the first proposal that we have in 406.5 is a reduction in lot size and lot width for single-family residential. So this has come from a lot of, again, this is one of those hot topics in the planning world right now, where we talk about housing affordability and what can cities do, and we talk about, and so we looked at other people's regulations. There are people like Richmond, their lot width is 75. In my opinion, I think that Berea needs to preserve a less dense single-family residential. So while I think that we are willing to compromise, willing to lessen that to 10,000 square feet and 80 feet across the front, my opinion is that leaves you, we've got a 15-foot side yard setback, so that leaves you from 80 feet, 50 feet wide to build in, which is ample for most of the houses being built in Berea right now. Of course, anyone could choose to make their lot sizes larger in a subdivision if they wanted to. This would just be the very minimum.
Yeah, we're looking at page 25, but
Yes.
back on page 21, R1A, for inner city, and it says, blah, 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 for provisions of single-family dwellings on smaller lots in the older parts of town. What is the older parts of town?
Good question. I read that not too long ago. I think this was meant for infill lots, but I think it is a zoning that is very underutilized. I think that in these conversations about housing affordability and smaller lot widths, and our comprehensive plan defines, in the comprehensive plan, we don't use zones as much as we just use either low density residential, which is your single family, medium density, or high density. And for R1A, they consider that because they're closer spaced, they're 60-foot lot frontages, they consider those medium density residential. Again, I think that is one of those areas that I think older is certainly open to interpretation, and I'm certainly open to changing that language if someone had a suggestion. But I think that, again, it is a very underutilized zoning.
I don't have a suggestion, I just didn't know.
I don't know what older is. Again, I
What-
think that would be, that would be open to interpretation depending on if someone was proposing that zone change. So in our future land, and that's probably something we need to look at when we do our comprehensive plan. we probably need to, look at areas that could be built out as R1A. But again, what is inner city to me means in city limits, right? I think that's just very open to interpretation. Yeah. Correct. If there's an existing lot, doesn't matter. They're legal, non-conforming, we call that, grandfathered in. Correct. Now that's a tiny house. Yeah. Be tough with a 36-inch hallway too, wouldn't it? Now you're taking 3 feet out of it. Yeah, they were. Yep, yep. I've seen that with 50-foot, with 75-foot lots. Yeah, that was real common. So 406.6, allowable land uses. I want to take just a minute to kind of outline how we read this table. So the zones are across the heading. The P, so for instance, under residential, if we look at detached single-family dwellings, the first heading on page 26. P is permitted. You can do that in that zone. You can build that. Blank means it is not allowed. C means that it is conditionally permitted. What that means, again, by KRS statute, is that it must go to Board of Adjustments for a conditional use permit. I will always say conditional use permits are the safest zoning practice because it allows for public input. It requires us to send notices to adjacent property owners so they can choose to have a say. They are informed. It requires us to basically put the word out, right, through newspaper, through other means that we get public information out so that the public can be involved and can have a say if they want to. So generally speaking, I will always say that is the safest way to go if you think that that use should be allowed. And particularly as we work through these changes that we've made, you know, just keep that in mind that the public will be able to have a say in these particular cases. So that kind of gives you an overview of how to read the table. We made a change to short-term rental. Short-term rentals are your, and I may kind of jump back and forth on this table just a little bit, but all on page 26 still. Short-term rental, we had them conditionally permitted in residential and business zones. What we realized after a few years of going to Board of Adjustments meetings to get conditional use permits is that your business zones and your multifamily residential are meant for rental. That's where your rentals are. So what do we care if they're doing short-term rental or long-term rental? So now we would like to just make those allowed. And then we've added a section in 408 that provides, if you want to flip over to page 37, that now puts some regulations on these short-term rentals. So if you're permitted to do this, here's what you have to comply with. We did leave all the not all the residential. We did leave single-family residential, your R1A, which is that inner city, your R1T, which is a townhome, and R2, which is duplex. We left those as conditionally permitted. And the reason for that is as we started having these hearings about short-term rentals, there were in certain subdivisions, there were adjacent property owners and community members who had who were concerned about, the term that kept coming up was a saturation point. What is the point which you will change my subdivision, right? Because before, I've lived in the subdivision for 30 years. We've raised our kids together, we grew up together, whatever. I know my neighbors. So now it's generally owner occupied. So now if you let short-term rentals come in there, it's gonna, at a certain point, if you allow, more than 2, more than 3, again, depending on your situation and your subdivision, the city's gonna allow my subdivision to change, right? Now it's all rental based. I don't know the people driving down my street. So what conditional use does is it still allows for those residents to get a notice, to come to the hearing, so that we can provide that protection for our citizens in those residential zones. The alternative to that is, again, we were rubber stamping these ones in multifamily, and we don't need to hear those. They just need to register with us, and they need to follow these certain guidelines. And so these guidelines came from conditions that were put on short-term rentals since we've been approving them since 2018. And that is, we want to do a safety inspection. We want to make sure it's safe to occupy. These people aren't familiar with this house like a long-term renter would be. We want to make sure that we're getting smoke detectors. We want to make sure we're getting contact information for someone 24 hours on call. And so I'm not going to go through all those, but just some general requirements that they would need to register with us. Back to page 26. And I'm going to go for about 10 more minutes, and then we'll move on to something else. Bed and breakfast home and bed and breakfast inn. So just by definition, we had defined each of those, and the distinction is if you had less than 5 or more than 5 rooms. We failed to put both of those, so we defined them, but we failed to put both of them in the chart. So we've added them to the chart to where, to what we think makes sense. Again, conditionally permitted in most of those residential zones.
Question.
Yep.
Why, in an agricultural zone, a bed and breakfast inn, or a home, either one of those, why would it be conditional use versus permitted?
So what we often hear in agriculture or more rural areas is you're going to impact the traffic on my little narrow road. Traffic is always the topic, right, of concern. And so again, my thinking was we need to give those community members the opportunity to come and express their concerns. But if we think it needs to be permitted, again, that's what we're here for.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, honestly, honestly, I haven't gone back and looked at how much a zone, how much land we have in city limits is agriculture. You know me, right? Anything that farmers are struggling these days, right? So almost all of them have an additional source of income, and agritourism is also huge.
It is.
So, and a lot of farmers incorporating agritourism into their farm enterprises.
But most agritourism uses, what I have found, are are subject to conditional use.
Yeah.
That's a pretty standard practice for anything agritourism.
Okay. I just,
Uh-huh.
Sure.
Sure.
Just be a good thing
It is definitely something I can check on for you. I do know that we have, so I don't hear as much, and this is just a comment based on my experience. We do hear often from the fire department, you know, do you have this owner's number? Do you have this owner's whatever? And so I don't know whether they do it as a courtesy or whether they do it as a, you know, standard operating procedure. But it is something I can find out and we'll let you know. Yep. And so that would be of any short-term rental where there was an issue. Or you're saying any rental? Yeah, that's right. Yep. Okay. Yep, we can get you an answer. I'm gonna go to, accessory dwelling unit. So this is another one of those planning hot topics. And this is something I would like very much like your all's input on. I've put them as permitted uses in residential, in R1, R2, and R3. So 3 residential zones. And then I've added a section in 408D, to basically put some more stringent requirements on those. So accessory dwelling units, by definition and by nature, are really meant to be mother-in-law's quarters or meant to be for a family member. It is not meant to be rented out for compensation. And so this puts in those guidelines where we can better accommodate that multi-generational living need that is out there. But what it does is it allows for, I've put more strict requirements in there, like if you're gonna put an accessory dwelling out there, you have to meet the same setbacks as the primary structure. So that inevitably through that regulation, you have to have more land. You can't scoot it right up to the property line. Because now we're really impacting what the neighbors, you know, if we were going to allow them 5 feet from a property line, we don't allow any other dwelling that close. So this does a couple things. I think this adds a little more protection for the neighbor, and it adds, and it more closely follows our density requirements at like a house per quarter acre, which is kind of a general standard. It requires parking spaces for that accessory dwelling unit. It requires permits, fire separation distance, so some safety measures. So, you know, this could look like an attached unit, it could be an addition onto a house, it could be a detached, you know, above a garage apartment, but has to provide some basic needs, so heating, cooking, sleeping, you know, a few little sanitary, a few things that we need on there. But I do have a question for the commission as to whether you all think that they should be conditionally permitted in those residential zones, again, as a protection to those community members and homeowners, or should we allow them but regulate them?
So you're right, it is one of those hot topics, right? When it comes to affordable housing, here's the, you know, changing that and that being one of those. And yeah, it's been interesting how each community deals with it. You know, it's, as I'm reading this, I'm trying to think, all right, what is the process? You know, I've got the land, I got the money, all this, right? So I come in and, you know, want to get a permit to build an ADU. How, you know, what does that look like? Are you going to is city, your office going to verify that, yes, you in fact have a mother-in-law and this is going to be for them, and all that, right? And the neighbors, you know, suddenly they see this happening in the neighbor's yard, and so depending on the quality of the neighbors, right, there's already going to be some questions about that. And then like, okay, so mom comes, this is done, mom comes, she lives, and just from my own experience, 6 months later, mom's gone. Then we have this structure that we have invested X number of dollars sitting there in the backyard, empty, right? Then what happens to that? You know, and I don't have the answers. I'm just trying to think through the scenarios, right, of that. Meanwhile, we still have issues of lack of affordable housing, you know, in the community, whether it be rental, you know, in particular. So I'm not proposing anything. I'm just throwing stuff out that I think that we need to think about, you know, that maybe it could become rental property, but their neighbors would have to have a say in that. So it could be a conditional use. I just think we need to probably think through this a little more.
Yeah. And I'm definitely, so my thinking on this and the direction that I was going is, and you're exactly right. What's gonna happen to that after the fact, right? Then you move your college kid in there and then what happens, right? It just sits empty. But the alternate to that is now we have rental units in a single family residential. Now that's essentially 2 family dwellings. That's a non-conforming use in that zone. And that's where I really have that challenge of, and so, you know, maybe it is a conditional use permit that we say, and that way the Board of Adjustments could put those conditions, you know, if they, you know, mom's gonna be here for 6 months, but after that, you know, she's moved to Florida, and we want to rent this unit, that at least allows the neighbors some say in that.
Yeah, and I mean, because we already have this happening under the radar in town, right? I mean,
Sure, sure.
And so trying to get everything above board and all of that, right? You know, and I could see a conditional use as a rental. And maybe it is permitted as a family-related secondary unit, but then it could only be rented under conditional use, and imposing restrictions like it can only be for 1 or 2 people at the most, right? I mean, because we already have, from personal experience, R1, you know, housing that there's half a dozen people in there, and they don't fall under the definition of family in our things, right? So we got already that kind of stuff happening in the community. Anyway, I'm just throwing that out.
Okay. Let me, let's make it a C.
What'd you say, Mike?
And then take out this section that puts these restrictions on it.
Well, I think your restriction, as you read it, the primary structure where ADUs are located shall be owner occupied. ADUs shall not be rented for compensation. Independently habitable, provide basic requirements of shelter, heating, cooking, sanitation, conform to the following standards. Attached or detached primary structure, shall be on the same water, electrical main service as primary residence. 2 off-street parking spaces. I mean, there's a lot of,
It's,
there's a bunch of things.
it'd be tough to meet,
Yeah.
and it would be for a short term. Like, in a lot of cases, that's for a short term. But again, ADUs are not meant to be rental property. That's not the idea behind them. The idea behind them is, again, to provide this multi-generational living.
Right.
It's just tough to figure out, how do you regulate that? So I've looked at lots of other people's regulations. I pulled this and that from different ones that I read. But over and over, it was the owner occupied, and the house had to be owner occupied. For us, we have, like the water company on a single family residential house won't let you set another meter.
Yeah.
You know, you only can have 1 meter. So some of that came from just a utility, issue that came up. Okay,
You've reached
All right.
your time, by the way.
okay. Thank you.
And I have a question related to that, not to belabor it. So, since conditional use goes with the owner, not with the property, how will those also be effective when the property is sold or transferred? With that structure?
Well, it's still owner occupied.
Oh, it's
So
just-
the owner changes, but they couldn't just rent it out.
Right,
Like the primary residence would have to be owner occupied. So if they sell the house,
Right.
the new owners just have to live there. That's what
but
that
if I
means.
buy a house that has an ADU that was approved by conditional use before, the person I bought it from,
Mm-hmm.
what do I have to do, what, you know what I'm saying? Will I have to come back to you guys to get another conditional use permit if I wanna?
Once that structure's there,
Right.
I don't think that makes sense.
Well, yeah, I'm just curious about what the process is.
Yeah, I think once that structure is there,
Okay.
the neighbors at the time have had a say.
Gotcha.
I think that's now legal to occupy.
Okay.
In the terms that, well, or in the terms, the conditions that were set by the board. So that would still apply. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. When we talk about accessory dwelling units, we talk about short-term rentals. If a developer wants to protect that neighborhood from, tiny houses and affordable housing options and all of these things, the best legal way for them to do that is through their deed restrictions, absolutely.
Right.
And so those are per subdivision, and that is not regulated by the city. That is regulated by an HOA or a member of that, community, subdivision. All right, so, we will pick up, where we left off in 2 weeks on the 28th, and then we'll go from there. I think we should be able to get through the rest of it. It looks like a lot, but I think that, this 406 is the most of the changes, so we should be able to get through that the next time. Thank you all for your time and input.
Thank you, Amanda.
Appreciate it.
I know a lot of thought and work went into this, Amanda. I appreciate that.
All right. Still in work session. Item 2, Berea Property Development, Patrick Sowers, development plan with waiver request for road frontage. Ridgewood Villas Townhomes, 834 through 846, is the way I'm reading that. Ridgewood Drive, and if you would, just be sure and state your name and, tell us all about it.
Patrick Sowers, looking to break up some lots on Ridgewood Drive. It's been sitting there for a while. I think it's zoned B4. We're gonna use the R1T zone, apply it to this. We're creating 48 townhome lots. The goal is to hopefully provide some housing around the 200,000 mark or less, some smaller units. We haven't completely designed the unit yet. Hoping to be able to add some single car garages in the mix. There's some ranches. I've laid out the lots. They're basically 20 foot wide, and I think there's 14 or 15 of them that is 24 foot wide, something like that. And what am I forgetting, Amanda? I'm a little jet lagged.
So we have taken this to the development review team for approval. Sewer, so these were lots that were originally, in the plat for Calico Phase 2. So
Okay.
in this, we had existing stormwater system. There are storm boxes along Ridgewood Drive there. They actually feed to the along Ridgewood Drive and all these entrances there, that we would essentially lay them out where you had townhomes on each side of the 4 lots, and they would have a common shared driveway going in to their individual parking spaces. So that would be accomplished through an access easement. The issue is that our regulations require each lot to front on a public way. So that would mean a variance for each lot, because they wouldn't front on a public way, they would front on a private drive.
Well, and if we were to build that as a public street, it'd just be a cul-de-sac. So it really wouldn't be what you would say, there's no reason to be on that street unless you live there.
And nor would the city really want to,
So it's basically a private street. And,
short little cul-de-sacs.
are you sure? Well, I think also we've agreed to take over we're gonna blacktop and bring that street, the Ridgewood Drive's been there. It needs some pavement, and we're gonna bring it up to the city standard plus Amanda's.
So just,
And,
just a quick question for me.
Yes,
It
sir.
looks like there's a large, goes from wide to narrow as you go down the street,
as far as the street itself,
Ridgewood Drive.
yes, it is. It narrows up at the top portion. I'm not sure why I wasn't part of the original development. I just know it's a whole lot of money to blacktop.
Okay.
But I think in order to make this look new, to kind of bring the development, we're getting close out there, I think, getting all the pavement done, or closer, and to make it look like a new project, it needs to be addressed. There's a few maintenance issues I think we need to take care of with the storm boxes and that kind of thing. And I think, were you guys planning to do the other side of Ridgewood this year? Was it proposed maybe for blacktop resurfacing?
My understanding is, at 821 Ridgewood, going north, that section of Ridgewood Drive, it is my understanding, or at least from our DIRT team meeting for this, Public Works had indicated that that section of Ridgewood would be paved this year. Actually, I think in the very near future. So getting, new pavement, with this development a little further south from that will really kind of clean that area up.
So the sidewalks are all gonna connect, all
Yep.
the things are gonna happen that,
We've got a 4-foot sidewalk shown along Ridgewood Drive, and that'll go from property line to property line, so you'll have, it'll connect to the existing apartments on Ridgewood Drive. It'll come all the way down to turn that corner on Pauline Drive, to their property line. Sewer, was somewhat installed, I think you guys have to do some extensions to sewer.
We do have to do some extensions. The sewer's along the back of the property there, what I guess would be the east side, and it's been there for a good number of years. The water's in the front. We have fire protection. The fire chief was happy with what was in place. So some sewer extensions and a whole lot of blacktop.
So what happens to the big piece behind these 4 pieces that you're gonna develop? Or is that included in this? That flag?
It is not, it is owned by a different,
Okay.
it is a completely separate, it's really, the topography falls off pretty quickly
Yeah,
down
it's-
there, so I don't wanna say it's undevelopable.
It's close. They're trying to sell it to me, but I'm,
It wouldn't be the easiest developable piece ever.
no, it would make a better pay lake maybe, but I don't know.
Yeah, the topography really doesn't.
So my other question is, at least on the agenda, a waiver request for road frontage. But are you also asking for a zone change from B4 to R1T?
So if you look at, the allowable land uses, and back to this one. Couple things I will point out is that, if you go to page loud. They accused me of being loud enough without a microphone. If you go to B4 zoning, townhomes are a permitted use. And one really interesting thing in our regulations, if you go to the note on page 25, at the bottom of the table, it says townhomes, now this is the table for dimensional requirements, so what are the lot sizes? And it says townhomes shall adhere to R1T requirements, which basically sets those minimum sizes for these lots. So how this would be done in terms of the legal process and the approval process is they've given us a development plan. This shows really didn't need a preliminary plat because we're not doing much infrastructure work. Generally, preliminary plats come with a set of construction plans. There's not a lot of construction here. So they submitted it as a development plan, gives us that layout, gives us what we need to approve all the details. But then, when it gets built out, it will have a final plat to create all these individual lot lines for these townhomes to be individually owned. That's where I'm saying the waiver needs to come in, because once we get all these individual lot lines, and maybe the waiver needs to come at the final plat, but I don't like for people to not know what they're getting into, right? And so that's why I was asking for it now. It may be more appropriate then, but again, once it's built, how are we gonna not approve it, right? So I think it's a discussion that needs to happen tonight. Are we okay with having this shared access, the shared driveway, and each individual lot would come off that shared driveway, as opposed to all fronting along Ridgewood Drive, and we would have all the driveways along Ridgewood?
So do we call that right-of-way access a private street? Does that help you with the waiver issue, kind of like we, in Harvest Park, it's a
More
private
than it
street?
matters.
Well, I guess my question is, with that being a private street at Harvest Park, did we do a waiver there too? I mean, it's kind of the same theory. I don't think we
I
did.
don't think we did.
Does it affect the number of units that can be built there?
No, in fact, this is much less dense than
If I did apartments.
multifamily.
Yeah,
If you did apartments, it's
probably 120
way
or
less
something.
units than what would be allowed.
Probably closer to 100, I would think.
And I think the idea behind townhomes, and you might want to speak to that, the idea behind townhomes is to provide a price point that has recently not been an option for people to buy homes in Burton.
Hopefully that is the idea. It's not to get in the 260 to 300, is to stay around the 200. I know that still sounds expensive, but with the land cost and the infrastructure, and then bringing that street up to where it needs to be to make it look like basically a new subdivision or a new development, it's fairly expensive.
Yeah, and I appreciate your approach to this too, because you're absolutely right, that entry point for homeowners is now so high.
It's kind of crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and I know,
And, and obviously our goal is young couples, single people, maybe there's some older folks that don't want, there'll be an HOA, so there'll be I think we have a dumpster pad common to each right-of-way access. We also have, the mowing to be taken care of. The goal is to maybe have some kind of dog park under the utility easement up to the north side, and, the goal is to be nice. We don't want it to, and I don't really want it to be the concrete jungle, and I don't want to, so as much green as we can get, and so we've been kind of working on the design that would, kind of fit all those. Can I interest you in buying one?
I think what
my wife is interested in downsizing. I am
See,
not
we'll
yet.
talk after.
I was really hoping for it to be affordable, affordable housing, because that's the major need in Berea right now. We did it, it's kind of a housing study. And, while we do need housing in general, what our major need is affordable housing, truly affordable. And so I was hoping that, since we're putting so many in there, that they would be affordable.
Be even less.
for the average, you know, for the average families, but it would've been nice to see if, you know, 900 square foot is not really for the average family, so.
No, these will be a little larger than that. I mean, like I say, I haven't laid them out yet, or haven't had the architect design. Kind of working with a couple builders with their thoughts and let someone put some input in. I'm definitely open to what will work and kind of hit the price point that we think we can get rid of them. Some of that obviously be driven by the cost of the land and the development costs, so.
Yeah, as one developer recently told me, is I have no control over the cost of materials,
No,
you know, and so many things. It's the land cost is like, you know, if anything that can be done with that. And so I think this is a good approach personally. I don't know what the motion might be. That's why I asked about variance versus, I don't know what the wording might be that we need to.
I think it would be, an approval of the development plan with a waiver for the minimum street frontage. Or for the, what did I don't know what it would be. See, what did I put on that thing? Yeah, waiver request for the street frontage, I think would be perfectly fine.
Anybody else have questions, concerns?
What's the exterior? You're not there yet. What the exterior?
well, I'm
finish-
there, but I anticipate be brick and siding. I prefer more brick than siding. Hopefully, it'll just last longer. And if we do the shared party wall in the town units, then it's more affordable. I can probably do the brick and not make it all vinyl. I'd like for it to complement what's out there, you know. I like the new apartments that the guys built over on the other drive. They look nice. And maybe some stone as well, like I said. I'm doing my best to work a few single car garages in, so I think that will just kind of help it. I don't want it to, look like just a typical 8-unit apartment building and then each one sold separately. I'm after some design and breakup and offsets and that kind of thing. I want it to look different than apartments, so that's the goal.
Okay.
Any more questions? Concerns? That's a dangerous question.
All right, thank you. Is that good?
Oh, I did have one other question. This hasn't been in front of the development team yet? or
It has.
It has. And everybody's good?
Everybody's good? Yep.
Okay, all right. Thank you, sir. And Rear Planning Commission going into our regular business session. Have a call to order, recognize any visitors that has anything for the commission tonight that's not already on the agenda. See nobody jumping up, so we'd like to look to approve minutes for the February 27th, 2024 meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to recognize and show my appreciation for so many council members and the mayor and Beverly being here.
Duly noted, absolutely. Appreciate them coming out and enjoying the planning commission work session and being a part of it, so thank you all.
Mr. Chairman, I move adoption of the February 27th minutes as distributed.
All right, well, we have a motion on the floor from Ms. Olinger and
I'll second that.
second by Denise. All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We've adopted the minutes. Old business? None. New business, Berea Property Development, Mr. Sowers again with the development plan. Waiver request for road frontage, Ridgewood Villas Townhomes, 834 through 846 Ridgewood Drive. Thanks for coming back up.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion. So I make a motion that we approve of the development plan for, let's see, 834 through 846 Ridgewood Drive with a waiver for the required street frontage.
We have a motion on the floor.
I second. I second.
We have a second, Mr. Barnett. And, any discussion, any questions, concerns from the commission? No discussion, let's put it up to a vote. All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Showers.
Thank you guys so much.
All right. Is that enough for tonight?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Motion. So moved, and second?
Second.
All right. Everybody agrees with that. Let's go home. Thank you.